foreshadowing. Foreshadowing, for those who may not know, is a storytelling technique whereby a line of dialogue or an event that occurs serves as an indication of something that happens in the future. The purpose of foreshadowing in Monogatari is twofold. For one, it allows the author to present clues in an order that makes the plot development more understandable. And then later down the line, these clues that may not have seemed important at the time can be given the context they need to become relevant. Two, it simply adds interest to the story and gives viewers an incentive to pay close attention to the dialogue and action in the show. Let's start with a blatant and fun example of foreshadowing that occurs in Neko Monogatari Shiro episode 1. On her way to school, Hanekawa runs into Hachikuji. At the end of their brief conversation, Hachikuji says, Okay, well, you might think that's all there is to it, and that example is pretty blatant as it is, but it does go deeper than that. Hanekawa's statement about blatant foreshadowing actually foreshadows other blatant examples of foreshadowing that occur in this episode. The first example appears in the form of an easy-to-miss cartoon drawn on the whiteboard as Senjougahara runs across the classroom. This whiteboard is literally showing us the events that take place in this episode. A second example of foreshadowing appears after Hanekawa enters Senjougahara's apartment. Our attention is brought specifically to a couple of signs near the stovetop. According to both the official translations on the Blu-ray as well as the fine folks at Horrible Subs, these read, "A single match can start a fire," and "Beware of fire." This is foreshadowing the end of the Neko Shiro arc. Black Hanekawa stops Kako the tiger from almost burning down Senjougahara's apartment after Hanekawa had slept in it the night before. Now, if you didn't think we were deep enough quite yet, the foreshadowing for all of this actually begins in Bakemonogatari, the first season of the series. These two fire safety signs, if you will, are brought attention to in episode 6, while Araragi is talking to Senjougahara about Kanbaru.
そう。ねえ、荒木くん。
なんだよ。
上は洪水、下は大火事なんだ。
そりゃまあ、風呂釜だろ。
ブッブー。答えは、カンバル駿河の家よ。
お前、学校のスターの家に何をするつもりだ?
Now, is this true foreshadowing? After all, Kanbaru's house doesn't catch on fire. Well, keep in mind, first, these signs are specifically brought attention to while Araragi and Senjougahara are talking about Kanbaru. Second, think about the relationships between the four relevant characters. Kanbaru is in love with Senjougahara, who is Araragi's girlfriend. Hanekawa is in love with Araragi, who is Senjougahara's boyfriend. Senjougahara jokes about Kanbaru's house catching on fire. Hanekawa's house actually catches on fire, and because of Hanekawa, Senjougahara's apartment almost actually catches on fire. Now, to some extent, the previous example is more a result of Shaft's anime adaptation than it is Nisio Isen's writing. Keep in mind, however, that Shaft works very closely with the author on the adaptation. Still, more typical of the Monogatari series are foreshadowing and irony that are tucked away in seemingly casual conversation. Foreshadowing gives context to clues in the show later on. Irony gives meaning to dialogue in the show by providing context later on. There are quite a few examples in Monogatari of characters saying a line of dialogue that we as the audience don't understand the implications of until more information is revealed. One example that stuck out to me during my third rewatch of the series is in Bakemonogatari episode 1. Hanekawa and Araragi are in the homeroom discussing what they should do for the upcoming culture festival.
あらかじめ私たちで候補を絞ってその中からみんなの投票で決定するっていうのでいいかな？
いいんじゃないのか。一見民主主義っぽくて
相変わらず嫌な言い方するよね。
I never understood why Araragi would be using a mean tone of voice, as Hanekawa says, until I saw Owarimonogatari, the most recent main season to be adapted. Episode 1 of Owari is about an event in Araragi's past that changed his view on justice and on how he perceives the people around him in general. During his freshman year, Araragi was brought back to his classroom at the request of the class representative, Oikura Sodachi. Sodachi was accusing someone in the class of cheating on the last math exam. The evidence brought up by Sodachi is that after a study session set up for about half the class, the half that attended the study session scored unusually higher than those who had not attended. The suspicion was that someone had leaked the actual test questions to those who attended the session. As one might expect, the class involved became very heated. No one would admit to having leaked the questions, and everyone just wanted to go home since school hours had ended already. The argument continued to escalate, with everyone blaming each other for cheating, until finally Araragi pleads with Sodachi to end the meeting and let everyone go home, since they were getting nowhere. Sodachi refuses and decides that the accusation of who cheated would come down to a vote. In other words, justice would be decided by the majority rule. Sodachi's intentions were to get Araragi accused, since he scored a perfect 100 on the exam and she already had a strong dislike for him. However, everyone in the class already knew that Araragi was very proficient in math. The result was that during the vote, over half of the class raised their hands against Sodachi herself. Araragi, a kid raised by 2 police officers and who grew up with a strong sense of justice and fairness, witnessed the reality that anything, no matter how awful, can be firmly decided by the majority rule. And if we have one more look at our Bakemonogatari conversation, I think the irony and the weight of this seemingly random and unimportant section of dialogue now becomes more clear.
あらかじめ私たちで候補を絞って、その中からみんなの投票で決定するっていうのでいいかな。
いいんじゃないのか。一見民主主義っぽくて。
Also of relevance is the fact that the information we learn about this event in Araragi's life is actually foreshadowed later on in the series. We learn in Neko Monogatari Shiro episode 2 that Hanekawa has asked about this event before, but Araragi refuses to share the information with her.
何があったのか。その点については春休み以上に堅なに語りたがらないけれど、高校1年生の頃に何らかの精神的な転機があったらしい。彼曰く落ちこぼれる原因とでも言うのか。
One of my favorite things about the Monogatari series is just how consistent the characters are and how true they are to their nature, even as they develop and grow. Araragi's attitude towards Hanekawa's suggestion is appropriate, and we as the audience don't even fully understand why until near the end of the series. My inspiration for talking about foreshadowing in the first place was Nisio Isen's afterword for Koyomi Monogatari. I won't read the whole thing to you, but I've linked to the Bakasuki translation in the description. He talks about foreshadowing as an important part of mystery stories. He goes on to say that as humans, we can sometimes make connections about foreshadowing where they don't exist. However, the nice thing about novels, and I guess fiction in general, is that the author can tell you if it's actually foreshadowing or not. Nisio then tells us specifically that Koyomi Monogatari is not foreshadowing, implying that everything preceding Koyomi Monogatari is. Not only that, but what's being foreshadowed is the final season of Monogatari, which will be adapted this summer. Interestingly, the PV for Owarimonogatari Season 2 shows a series of cuts that are pulled from the entirety of the show up through the end of Koyomi Monogatari. Both Shaft and Nisio Isen seem to be telling us to go back and revisit some of the old material, challenging us to come up with our own theories for what is ultimately going to happen in the final season. That said, I think this is the perfect time for fans to be rewatching and looking at some of the foreshadowing we've already seen in the series thus far. Well, that will do it for now, but I hope to be back soon with a look at some more examples of foreshadowing in Monogatari and the relevance it has to the main plot. Take care, and thanks for watching.
これでパズルのピースが全て埋まりましたよ。
これまで聞いていた話と若干細部が矛盾する箇所もありますけれど、そういう矛盾の辻褄合わせもあらゆる物語の聞き手こと私星野扇の楽しみでもあります。